When it comes to self-development, the vital point is to practice. It's not about the path you choose, but the steps you take on your journey. If you're ready to transform and alchemize your unique purpose, then you've tuned into the right frequency. Welcome to The Vital Point. I'm your host, Jonathan Schechter. As a transformation coach and breathwork facilitator, I'm invested in making the dynamic landscape of personal evolution accessible. My goal is to inspire you to take action for yourself. You have the capacity to transform, grow, and bring your dreams to life. And with so many diverse and powerful modalities at our fingertips, this podcast aims to be more than just a conversation. It's an interactive guide providing not only knowledge, but also hands-on practices, from meditations to breathwork, from journaling exercises to real-life transformation techniques. I'll share my own experiences while also spotlighting those who are walking their paths and embodying what they teach. Because at the heart of transformation, the key is not just to learn, but to practice. That's the vital point. Are you ready to move from theory to practice, from passive listening to active transformation? Let's do more than just discuss change. Let's integrate it together. Just as words don't cook rice and hearing about push-ups won't make you stronger, remember the vital point is to practice. Let's begin this journey together. My guest today is Taylor Bratches, who is a DJ, writer, energy healer, and psychedelic guide based in Boulder, Colorado. She was a speaker at the recent MAPS Psychedelic Science Convention this year, and her talk was entitled Rave as Ritual, the intersection of collective movement and entheogens. She has 18 years of experience with psychedelics and has spent over a decade immersed in the electronic music community as a raver, DJ, and music critic. As a music journalist, she writes album reviews and curates a feature series on rave culture called Dance Floor Epiphanies for the global publication Resident Advisor. Additionally, she's studied spiritual traditions for nearly 20 years, is a trance channel, and specializes in a channeled form of energy work called prana-vidya. She works at an integrative healing center in Denver called Agni and Soma. She also is a certified psychedelic practitioner through Sound Mind Institute and was a guide and energy worker for the Manhattan-based psychedelic organization Cardia. She also holds an MFA in creative writing from UC Irvine and is currently writing a memoir. So, Taylor, welcome to the Vital Point podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
Yeah.
I appreciate being here.
Yeah. So, like we mentioned in the intro, you gave this amazing talk at the MAPS conference, and I'm not like trying to blow smoke when I say that when I was looking at this just massive itinerary of talks and panels and presentations and workshops, your talk really popped out to me and was like one of the things that I marked as I gotta go see this.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons for that is that I was really curious about the topic, rave as ritual, because it's something that I've often felt in my own life and seen in other people, as, you know, somewhat of an old school raver myself. You know, like, I'm going to date myself here a little bit, but like, I mean, I started listening to electronic music in probably like 95 and started raving in 97. And
awesome. I'm jealous.
But there's been these moments, even though there was obviously like the way that it was introduced to me was this recreational setting. And I had experience recreationally with, psychedelics before raving. But even before experiencing the rave environment, I always felt like, even though I didn't know like what a ceremony was necessarily, or like what integration was, I often felt that my journeys and my trips, I like saying journeys more than trips, but whatever, were leading me in this more spiritual direction. You know, like, yeah, I've had times where I'm just sitting around and like giggling with my friends or whatever, but there were often times these like really introspective, insightful, kind of like leading you into the deeper mysteries of life type experiences, rather than like, I just want to watch the wall like breathe and like, you know, colors and stuff, right? And when I started going to raves, it was like, here is this environment that's kind of, here's this container where you can play within that.
Yeah.
And that's how I've always felt. And then when I started, even before we were dating, but when I started, you know, becoming friends with my current partner, who works a lot with ayahuasca and really had never had a recreational plant medicine or psychedelic experience, literally the first time we hung out, we started having this conversation where I started describing my rave experience to her. And she was like, this sounds shamanic. And I'm like, what is that? And so we were coming from these two different worlds, but like connecting it through the rave as this ritual container. And so, yeah, like I definitely want to like talk more about that, but like, I think that's a good place maybe just to stop talking and let you kind of reflect, or I would love to hear more if you wanted to maybe give a little bit of a summary of what the Rave's ritual was, and then we can kind of jump in and dissect it more.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. I love that story, you know, of you and your partner. That's so beautiful. And also it's such a, I think, microcosmic example of the larger perspectives, you know, that sometimes are at odds, or people, maybe there's some tension between them.
Right.
You know, oh, if you're in the psychedelic space, you're doing something wrong if it's recreational, or ravers don't understand, like, you know, the more intentional, you know, like super specific contained environment, you know, they seem at odds, and yet, and of course there are stark differences, but what I was trying to really get across in my talk is the rave is a ritual. Right. It is a ritual. Whether or not you want to call it that, that's what it is. And it has a lot of the same indicators of traditional ritual. You know, it's a context, it's a contained environment, there's specific etiquette, there's specific things happening, there's intentional music, like the DJs are kind of shamanic, you know, for lack of a better way of putting it. And like some people in the rave scene might, you know, people might take issue with me saying that, but there are some DJs in the scene who literally are approaching it from a shamanic perspective.
Right.
Eris Drew is one of them, who I quoted in my talk. And, you know, so, and it is people moving together to music on a psychedelic in a communal setting with at least some loose intention, even if the intention is to have fun, you know? And so it's a ritual context. And I think the reason it exists is because we lack ritual in our culture. And so I'm just really interested in the way raving kind of fills this hole in our modern lives, that, you know, we evolved with ritual throughout human history. And in indigenous culture, like ritual, not only ritual, but dance is essential to life in many cultures. It's not just dance, it's a language, it's a dialogue, it's a way to it's storytelling, it's a way to pass on ancestry and history. And you know, I'm super passionate about dance. I grew up as a dancer. So, you know, we're talking about a dance ritual here. And I think it's like just one of the most powerful rituals to move together as, you know, as a community to music on a psychedelic and feeling your body in a new way. That's a beautiful modern ritual, I think. And yeah, and I could talk more about it. I just think it's like we're returning to the primal that's been really suppressed in modern society. And we're doing that with other therapeutic psychedelic spaces too. You know, I think psychedelics in general, you know, it's yes, like the power of healing is a part of that, but the power of them to reintegrate ritual back into people's lives is also kind of a beautiful part of it, because we need rituals other than like the wedding every few years and the funeral, and, if you're not religious, you have less rituals, so, yeah, yeah, I mean, I could talk so much about the spiritual dimensions of rave culture and how that's shown up in my own life. So,
yeah, I recently talked with Dr. Joe Tafur, and I was asking him, because he's a Western trained MD and also like Peruvian trained ayahuasquero, and I was like, well, what's the connection between the science and the spirit, sort of the mystery, the psychedelic world? And he said, well, the psychedelics open us to the spiritual and open us to that heart energy. And that's always something that I found within the rave culture, and not every single party and not everybody is going to do that, but it's a container. It's there if you want it. And I think that was one of the things that you mentioned in your talk, was you cited this study, Kent study from 2021, where it was talking about these 4 Ds: dance, drums, deprivation of sleep and food, and drugs. And that people, when they were surveyed afterwards, when there was an intention of, I'm going to enter this with the intention of having this experience, that there was this sense of awe, this sort of transformational thing that could happen. And I think that a lot of people end up sort of having that experience in the rave setting, is like, maybe they didn't know that they were going into that, but when they're there and they enter the container and they are in this experience where there is this culture of like, hey, you're free here. You're free to be yourself. This is a judgment-free zone. This is an area where you can explore yourself, whether that's through dance or through psychedelics or through friendship, or all those things together. And then they open into that, and there is that sense of awe, and it's just like, and I love like watching you right now, just like what just happens somatically, because like we were talking about before we hit record, I had that sense last night as I was thinking about this interview and like going back to some of my rave moments, and like the music and the memories that are like imprinted on my mind, that whole just like that somatic, like, like it just feels so good. And it creates these imprints that like just stay with you forever, even now. And I really love that you brought in that community aspect of it, that for those that may not be aware, could you just briefly explain one of the sort of core tenets of rave culture, which is Plur?
Yes, sure. I also want to mention the Kent study, since you brought it up too, before I go into that.
Yeah, for sure.
Because a really interesting thing about that study, I mean, for me, the results were pretty unsurprising. And yes, the 4 Ds taken together in the rave context produced awe, but it also produced significant positive behavioral outcomes in individuals. And it also produced deep, meaningful social bonds that really lasted, so, and that's like, yes, of course. But to me, the somewhat surprising result was that they also noticed that without intentional use and without the ritual context of the rave, the 4 Ds actually indulging in the 4Ds led to negative behavioral outcomes, which is basically saying it's the rave itself, it's the ritual context that's leading to the positive behavioral shifts and the deep, meaningful social bonds. So, drums and deprivation and dance alone, without the ritual context, it's not as powerful, you know, in fact, it can be detrimental.
Yeah.
So it's pretty much showing it's the rave, it's the context that is creating these outcomes. And because of the communal aspect. And I think that, and for context, like I was a spiritual seeker, like heavy spiritual seeker before I found rave culture. And I was already super into psychedelics. I started experimenting with psychedelics pretty young when I was a teenager. I just didn't necessarily. So when I found rave culture, it was just like perfect. It was just a perfect synthesis of my love for psychedelics, my spiritual seeking and spiritual relationship to psychedelics, and then my background in dance, my obsession with music. It just all went together. It was like, wow, this is the thing, but really it's the community aspect. Like you said, that's really so beautiful. And, I've done plenty of therapeutic one-on-one psychedelic use. I've done solo psychedelic use. I've done religious psychedelic use. I was in the Santo Daime at one point when I was younger. So I've done, the ayahuasca settings, like I've done the therapeutic, we're doing this to process trauma only with one therapist. And I think all of the settings are powerful and important. But that said, there's something about relational healing that I think is really important. I mean, our trauma comes from an experience with others, and I think that one way to really work through a lot of trauma and other things is to be vulnerable in spaces with other people. It's a form of group therapy, in my opinion, and you experience all kinds of things at the rave, mostly positive. And I've had some negative experiences at raves. So it's like, it's not a perfect situation. Just like there's problematic things that occur in ayahuasca circles, it's like, but I think there's a heavy stigma on rave culture in general, but especially some people in the psychedelic community, I think I'll say a limited perspective on what it is. And I think one of the most important parts of it is that it's communal. It's something you do with others. And the other really cool thing is that you can also be alone on the dance floor. You can shut your eyes. I mean, that I will be alone in my body, experiencing my body for hours on end without being around others. It's a really beautiful experience.
Yeah, no, I think that it's important that you mentioned that. And what it brings up for me is the ceremonial container, or even when I think about, sort of meditation in the Buddhist context. There's lots of different mindfulness meditation and other meditations, right? So, I always say like, well, what makes something quote unquote Buddhist is that before you actually start the whatever action you're taking, there's an intention behind it, right? You're like, you're bringing that intention to mind, and then you do the thing, like in this case, this example, meditation. And then at the end, there's like a dedication. You're sort of bringing that intention full circle of like, oh yeah, this is why I did this, right? And sort of dedicating that merit energetically. And so I think that the rave can be that as well. And it comes down to intentions. It's like, are you going there with the intention of like sort of seeking or being open? And that's an interesting thing about psychedelics, is sometimes you can set one intention and the medicine's going to take you in a different direction, or the setting is going to take you in a different direction. And then you have that opportunity to like well, do I want to go with this? Do I not want to go with this? But with that container of the rave, with these, you know, the right DJs that are basically like these neo shamans and are coming from an energetic perspective of like, how am I creating this emotional and energetic journey through the music that I'm playing, and this environment where you can be free to express, to connect, to, just like you said, be yourself and completely be by yourself if that's what's needed in that moment. And then what's amazing is like you could literally be by yourself for hours and then like open your eyes and like turn to the person next to you and make this like super amazing like deep connection. That just doesn't happen in like a bar or, you know, like sort of even like sometimes a club environment or just normal life, you know, like you wouldn't necessarily like just become best friends with the person at the table next to you at the restaurant, you know?
Right.
And I do think it's important to sort of to mention that Plur aspect because that's a sort of a foundation, right?
Yeah, totally. So return to your Plur question. So it stands for peace, love, unity, and respect.
Yeah.
It's been a tenet, you know, it's been a word that's known in rave culture for many, many years, you know, since I think the 90s. I'd have to look that up, but yeah, I mean, a long time. It's, yeah, I mean, and when we talk about intention setting, it might look a little different in rave culture than it would in, you know, a psychedelic therapy experience, in the sense that there are these foundational understandings, you know, that permeate rave culture, you know, that people know about. So, and Plur has kind of like shifted form over the years in the sense that now, I would argue, especially lately, it's gotten even more intentional with certain clubs, for example. You can't go into the club until the bouncer gives you a little talk about the nature of Plur, essentially. They might not word it that way, but there's been a big push in clubs and underground rave culture in the past several years to make sure that people who are coming understand this is an intentional environment and it's about safety and it's about harm reduction and it's about creating a space where people feel safe and free to be themselves. So there's also talk about, you know, respect everybody. You know, there's a zero tolerance policy for disrespect in many forms. So that's something that's been happening more in rave culture. So there is this kind of intention setting that does occur a lot of the time where people understand if you do certain things or if you're a jerk, like you're gonna get there's gonna be a consequence. And there's a lot of there's a lot of etiquette in rave culture too, like that some institutions and clubs like take to a certain degree. Like, for example, you know, Berghain in Berlin, one of the most famous clubs in Berlin, that is like an iconic, amazing place. You know, I had many experiences there in my mid-20s that changed my life.
I'm a little jealous of that.
Yeah. Yeah, but you know, for example, they're like they're known for their very strict door policies, but when you get in, they put a sticker over your phone camera, and a lot of places do that. No phones on the dance floor is just a part of rave culture. It's a piece of the etiquette piece. If like this club nowadays in New York, if you have your phone out, a security person will gently tell you, please, you can't have your phone, you know, or leave the dance floor. So, and the phone piece is about a lot of things. It's about, I think it's really about presence. You know, we're acknowledging that it's a form of being super present when you're dancing on the dance floor with others. it kills the vibe, is what people say, you know. There's a lot of vibe killer potentials where you want to limit that as much as possible. I mean, how would people feel if they were opening their phones in an ayahuasca ceremony?
Right.
You know, it's the same thing. It's like, we're not going to open our phones because we're in an altered state of deep presence with others. And it's almost disrespectful to open a phone, you know, and also shine a light in a dark setting. So there's things like that are a little bit more on the etiquette side, but you could view them as a form of intention setting.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, like that exists.
in a way, like in a way, I feel grateful that when I started to rave, it was like basically before cell phones and like, yeah, we had like pagers and stuff. And so there wasn't that aspect to it, but I'm really glad that you brought up that moment. And you mentioned that in your talk about like the club where before you get to go and dance and be a part of this community, somebody's like sitting there and saying, hey, this is kind of our culture, and we're inviting you into this space, and this is the expectation that we have, you know. And it's like, it's not restrictive. In fact, it's helping to bring that community together. And it reminded me of, one of the places that I started this conversation with my partner with, which was describing to her in like, between like 99 and like 2001, 2002, this sort of role that I assigned myself with my girlfriend at the time, which was we within like the LA, Southern California, like rave culture, we were what was known as good vibers. And so like literally I would spend hours of the night with my girlfriend going around and talking and meeting different people at the party, like giving them candy bracelets, giving them like treats, learning like different massages and different things that I could do to make their experience better. But also awesome. But also just like talking to them and being like, hey, how are you? Are you having a good time? Oh, is this your first time? Like, let me like, not like explain things to you, but do you have any questions? Are you having fun? Like what's, and just like sort of like helping. Yeah. Like making sure like my intention going and doing this was like, anyone that I talk to, I just want to give them like the best, make sure that they're having the best night as possible. So if that just means like saying like, hi, how are you? And like giving them a hug, that's great. If somebody's like, rolling really hard on MDMA for the first time, especially maybe like they've never been in this environment, like how can I support them? And like learning these techniques of like energy manipulation and like just things that would like help bring the roll up. And there were these moments. I mean, I met so many cool people that way, like, friends that I would only see at these parties. But like, I was explaining to her in this conversation, like some of the most magical moments to me during that time period were like, say I would meet someone and they're like, oh, I'm rolling really hard. And I'd be like, oh, like I could give you this massage that'll make it even better. And they'd be like, no. And I'm like, okay, cool. No problem. And like, sometimes they'd be like, okay, cool. And so like, I'd start giving them like this massage. And sometimes I would just observe this. Like I wouldn't even be a part of it. Right. But like, say I'm giving them this massage and then somewhere out of nowhere, like other people just appear. And like one person's like standing behind me, like giving them a light show. And like somebody else is like, has like a fan and they're like, like fanning them. And all of a sudden there's like 3 to 5 people all just taking care of this one person. Yeah. And like that's putting them in this state of like complete ecstasy where sometimes it's like their entire body would relax to the point of not being able to stand up, because there was so much, like they were just in that medicine so much. And the way that would happen spontaneously And like, it was almost like magical, you know. It was like, and especially when you were watching it and not participating, just like sort of watching the good vibes like come out of nowhere and like
totally. Well, this is why, you know, and I'll also say, of course, like consent around touch is always important.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
But it's like it's one of these things where this is part of the communal aspect
Right.
that I was talking about, you know, and this is why I started Dance Floor Epiphanies, the feature series that I run for Resident Advisor, because I mean, I knew people were having these magical experiences with each other on the dance floor, myself included. And I wanted there to be something in the music journalism sphere, the electronic music journalism sphere, that was just a little different, that was more personal, you know, not just about like a news piece on, oh, this party's happening or this festival's happening or this artist is doing this. Like let's like name what's happening here. Like there are people having epiphanies on the dance floor with each other. There are really transformative moments happening here. So and, you know, in that series it's a collection of stories from people all over the world who recount experiences like that, you know, or really deeply important and transformative experiences that they've had at raves in their life. And they're just these little like paragraph long memoir vignettes. And man, it's hard to read them without crying sometimes. I mean, it's amazing, you know, the experiences that people have.
Right.
And there's one there, I will say I get a lot of, so I did this one called Love in the Club, a couple of years, maybe it was a year ago or something. And it was about people who had some experience of, you know, love, falling in love, you know, and it was interesting. It was so cool because some people had met their partners who they became married to and had kids with who had been in the rave scene, you know, but then a lot of it was about fleeting connections, you know, and there's a transience in the rave scene. It's interesting because like you said, you have these momentary important experiences that leave impressions on you for the rest of your life. And yet sometimes it's a single night and that was it. And you met a person one night only and it changed your life, you know? So I think that's also something about rave culture that I think is really interesting and beautiful and something people don't talk about very often. I don't know. It's at the same time though, this is a ritual that becomes a lifestyle for people. So, you know, they seek that moment, that transient moment over and over again. And I've done it, you know, for years because that moment contains so much. It's really powerful, you know, these experiences that people can have. And I also wanted to mention, like, you know, sometimes, okay, like there have been several times where I'm dancing with my eyes closed for hours, so deeply in tune with my body and with my spirituality and like feeling like I'm connected to source on the dance floor. And then I open my eyes and I see a sea of bodies moving pretty much in unison to the same beat. And it is unity consciousness. You know, it's a powerful experience of, wow, we are all in this together. You know, and it's we're all in it. It's like you can tell people are not thinking, you know, when you're dancing and when you're deeply in your body, you're getting out of the space of the cerebral mind, you're entering the heart, like you said, you know, and to have that heart-based experience of movement and then seeing that everyone else is having that experience, I mean, it's really, really powerful. So
I want to share an experience or a couple of experiences that kind of illustrate what you were just talking about in my own way. So they both were in Denver. Awesome. One was last year and one was a couple of months ago, and they were both at the same club called Real Works. And the first one a year ago was like my favorite producer for years, and he was playing an open to close set, which meant from
who?
Guy J.
Okay, yeah, I know Guy J.
So he was started at like 9:30, 10, and was going till 2 a.m. And
Awesome.
so again, that's, you know, for the listeners or people watching, okay, this happens, right? Sometimes,
Yes.
like whether you're
Yes.
listening to one DJ or a bunch of DJs, like there's a continuity that's happening from beginning to end. And you know,
Yeah.
even you know, 9 to 2 is a pretty short amount of
Pretty
time
short.
in the context of the rave. But okay.
I'll just mention too, like I've seen many, like two of my favorite DJs specifically do 9-hour
Right.
sets.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
once one of my favorite DJs did a 12-hour set.
Yeah.
It's hard for people to fathom, but
Well, yeah.
this is again this is the deep state that we're in.
Right. People that aren't you and me.
Yeah, exactly.
For us, it's like, it's normal. But so just to give people the context that this is what happens. And yeah, it's cool when, you know, every hour to 2 hours, the DJ's switching. That's normal. But there's something magical when there's one DJ that's taking you on this journey where they know that it is a journey. It is a story with these peaks and valleys. And there's an expectation that, yeah, this is a one continuous thing, even though you're playing different songs, even though people are going to come and go, that there also are people that are going to be there from beginning to end. And like really allowing yourself as an artist, and if we're putting it into this shamanic context, like energetically, that you're creating this container, right? And so this was a year ago. I was just beginning to explore and heal a pretty intense trauma that I had experienced. And so even though I went and I was really excited, I was actually really disappointed in the experience myself because I didn't feel safe. The environment was really, really overstimulating to my nervous system. Even though I didn't really take any psychedelics, I took like a microdose. It still was too much. And I spent most of the time sitting down on a couch, like trying to keep myself from freaking out because I really wanted to be there and like listen to the music. And I ended up leaving early because I just kept getting more and more dysregulated. And I felt really disappointed.
Yeah.
Fast forward to a year later, I come back to the same venue, the same promoters, and watched Nick Warren and Hernan Catano play together for 6 hours plus, you know, back to back, and complete night and day difference of experience in terms of I was literally I was dancing and I looked up and I realized I feel completely safe right now. And the relief that I felt, the joy that I felt in like being back in basically almost the same environment, you know, same room, same mass of people, same lasers and lights and overstimulation, and like realizing, wow, I feel really safe right now. I feel really good right now, was magical. And I had the opportunity to consciously use some of the resources and tools that I had been practicing over the last year, as far as somatic experiencing, as far as bilateral stimulation. And I'm like, wow, this actually works in this context. Cause like EMDR is this therapeutic model where you're using bilateral stimulation. You can do that with the eyes, or you can tap, you know, like left, right, left, right, left, right. And I started playing with that in terms of how I was dancing. Cause there's this 4/4 constant, you know, drum beat. And I was like, wait, what if I like consciously make this into a bilateral sort of thing? And I started to notice how my nervous system was relaxing and responding to that.
Totally. Oh my gosh, I love that.
And so not only was it like just, you know, watching these two masterful, I definitely consider them, shamans in their own way, where they're just like, just taking you on this beautiful journey. And they really just understand, I think between the two of them, they probably have at least 60 to 70 years of DJing experience, right?
Gosh,
so they like understand how to move that energy, but like to be in that place where I could explore these things in an intentional way that I had never done before was just incredible. And the fact that I felt safe to explore those parts of myself and, open myself up to that MDMA experience in a sort of unregulated environment. Cause it's one thing. It's like, okay, do you feel safe in your house or in a, with a facilitator where, it's safe, you can go to quiet if you need to, like, okay, it's taking me time to feel safe in that environment, but to be back in this place where like my heart feels so free and to be able to feel safe and joyous in that was like, just priceless. And I was so there by myself. I talked to two people the whole night. And it was like one of the greatest like dance experiences that I can think of, and then that's there's great. A lot of them that I have, like just like you, like where we could just sit here and like tell stories,
recount all of our endless dance experience. Totally.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. Thank you for sharing. It makes me think of so many things. I think the first thing I want to mention is I had a similar experience back to Berghain in Berlin, the club. I had two completely night and day experiences there. And one was probably the worst trip of my life. So, and I'm saying this for a few reasons, like so there are times, like, again, the rave scene is not perfect because it's an unregulated environment. Like you said, like, if you don't go into it with intention, it's going to get gnarly, or if you have stuff that you haven't processed, it's going to be super overstimulating and overwhelming and disorienting. And it was the worst acid trip of my life. I felt like I was being dragged to hell and back. I could not approach the dance floor because the sound felt like I felt the sound so somatically and it hurt. It was a journey. It was a wild journey of a night. And I survived it. But then I went back again and it was like the best experience of my life. And just totally night and day, like just so good, just such a beautiful unfolding. And I'll just mention, like, this is actually something about rave culture that I think is really important. It's about the duality to some degree, like at proper raves, it's so primal, like you're like, the bathrooms are disgusting, it's gross, like you are, but it's something about the primal nature of it. It can be dark and light at the same time. And I think that that's beautiful. And I think I kind of, to be honest, like take issue a little bit with, like, of course we want people to have the best psychedelic experiences possible, right? And we want to contain it very well. And we want to hold, as a psychedelic facilitator, I do my best to curate the most positive experience that I can, but you don't know what the psychedelics and the medicine are going to show you. Right. And like, let's just embrace that light and dark exists. And I think rave culture is like such a good way to play with and explore that range in a safe environment. It is a safe container ultimately. It's like people for the most part are there wanting to have a good time together and support one another. But I think I mentioned this in my talk too, because it's a dance ritual and it's somatic, it creates this kind of very grounded transcendence, I like to call it. There's not, whereas maybe there's like some spiritual bypassing happening in other contexts, oh wow, now I'm at source, like immediately. And I'm so out of my body, you know, which, hey, I've had those. I love those experiences. They've been deeply transformative. But with rave culture, like you're dancing, like your feet are on the ground and you're in a container with a bunch of people. And so, you know, if you're going to have a bright, transcendent, divine, you know, spiritual experience, or you're going to have a dark experience, like you're in your whole chakra system, you know, you're not bypassing the lower chakras, like you are feeling it all. And I think that is something that's kind of cool about rave culture is it's a grounded, ecstatic experience. It's about going deeply into the body in order to go out of the body. And that itself, that right there led me to my own practices currently with energy work and everything I do. But yeah, and also, like, I love what you said about the somatic experiencing pieces, because I didn't even think about that. And I'm surprised I haven't thought about that. Like the left, right, just normal dancing, back, forth, like the way that balances the hemispheres of the brain. And I have my own ways of like balancing the hemispheres of my brain when I do energy work and stuff, like through movements I do. So right. I think there's something about, again, bringing it back to dance. Dance is really underestimated as a healing tool, and for inhabiting the body and balancing the body, especially if you've had physical traumas in your life.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and you mentioned that in your talk of like the sort of the somatic, you know, the somatic release and the way that the nervous system works as far as, you know, shaking, trembling, moving,
yes.
to get that traumatic energy out of the body to complete that cycle. And that, you know, dance is a natural form of that.
Yes.
You know, like, you can create a resource for yourself where, like, you know, you're laying down and doing like a trauma release exercise, or, you know, like for me, when I started doing trauma work, I connected to the fact that, like, when I was a kid, I was able to like basically make my legs shake without without an affect. Like, it was really happening, but I could sort of like start the motor and then just let it go, and it would go for a certain point and then just release. And when I was a kid, I just thought I was just doing some stupid human trick, right? Like, I didn't know that I was like
a trauma release exercise.
I didn't know that that's what I was doing. And then as I started to do intentional trauma work, I was like, oh, I can tap into this again in a more intentional way. And it's funny because, like, I'll show my clients now, like, I'll be teaching a group, and, you know, they'll be talking about, well, what's this release and blah, blah, blah. And I'll be like, well, here, let me show you. And like, I can't always do it. Like, sometimes I'm super regulated and like, I'm in a really good space. And like, I might only shake for like a couple of seconds, but usually it starts going, and I'm like, I'm not doing this. Like, I'm not faking this. This is really happening. And they can just watch it, like, get to a place where it like calms down naturally.
Yes.
Like the battery is, you know, depleted of its charge.
Yes.
And
I love this topic.
Yeah.
I want to keep going.
No. So going. I really loved that, you know, you brought that in to your talk, you know, like mentioning that, because it is something that's happening, like, and I think maybe even unconsciously, like, you might not be saying like, oh, I'm going to go and dance so that I can release this trauma. Yeah. But it's happening anyway.
It's happening. Right? It's definitely happening.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's happened to me so many times. And yeah, I want to pause on this topic for a bit, if that's okay. Cause like the topic of tremoring, shaking I'm obsessed with. So dance is a way to intentionally shake it off. We can do that with dance.
Right.
And when you get into flow states with dance, you start to do it unconsciously. You know, I mean, I can't tell you how many times it's like, I'm not moving, like the music is moving me, you know? And And these deep flow states of dancing are just the way, and just when you just allow your body's natural language of movement to occur, which is different for everyone, you know, it's moving energy through your system. It's releasing a lot of trauma. I've had multiple epiphanies dancing on and off psychedelics on dance floors where, I mean, I have had meltdowns on dance floors. I have had full blown, holy shit moments that I could never get in therapy about, also related to social stuff. Like, oh, I have social anxiety. Where is that coming from? Okay, I'm going to dance through it. I'm going to be in my body. And boom, epiphany about, wow, my social anxiety comes from the fact that I never received proper bonding with my parents, you know,
Yeah.
things like that. And it's like, it's happening as I'm shaking my body intentionally.
Yeah.
So it's like, and this is also sort of how I approach my energy work. Like to me, healing in the body is a full system. It's a cohesive system between the physical, the energetic, and the emotional. And it's really three bodies. You could add the mental to that, but it's like, it's multiple bodies in one, and they all correspond and they all communicate with each other. So when you start to work with moving the body, whether through dance or through unconscious shaking, you know, other things can come up. You know, you might remember traumas. You might, even if you don't remember trauma, you know, your body has the memory. The body keeps the score.
Yeah.
It starts to release things. And yeah, and it's such a beautifully powerful, potent medicine, you know, to shake. And like, just to kind of recap, like some things I mentioned in the talk is, you know, there's a trauma cycle, you know, that we experience as humans and also animals experience. And, you know, different stages of the trauma cycle, different chemicals are released in preparation for fight or flight and after. And, you know, if an animal survives the trauma, like they'll tremor after to return them to equilibrium. And it just moves the fear through the system, you know. And humans have this too, as you've experienced with TRE. And my sister actually was the one who turned me on to TRE because she started doing it. And she became obsessed with it. I mean, it was wild to watch, you know. I mean, it looks a little scary even. It's like the body has its own knowledge, you know, and it knows how to release things. It's just that we've been so heavily conditioned. It's been socialized out of us, our natural tremoring abilities. But like shaking is an important tool for releasing tension, for moving trauma. And yeah, and she would just like shake unconsciously, and like, you know, like it would almost look seizure-ish at times, but she's like, it feels so good, you know. And I do this with my energy work too. So yeah, we can pause there, but I kind of want to tell you the story of how I even started doing energy work through raving.
Yeah, please.
Okay, yeah. So there's my favorite party of all time is actually in Boulder, where I currently live. And they don't advertise it at all, so I'm not going to talk about the name or anything like that. But it's just a beautiful, intentional gathering on sacred land in the mountains. You know, I mean, it's along a river, and there's a mountainside, and it's invite only. It's like, it's very well contained. It's very intentional. It's very psychedelic, and just perfectly curated. And so anyway, years ago, I was in 2016. I was there, and you know, I took acid. I was in a deep flow state, dancing for hours on end. I mean, probably 4 hours, you know, straight, dancing, flow state. And then I took a break. And there's this rock outcropping on the land. You can hike up to it, and it's just like this rock that just like hangs off this cliff, and it's like valley mountain view. It's beautiful. And I would go up there in the middle of the night to meditate. And so I danced, went up there in the middle of the night to meditate, and felt so good, just like so grateful, so grateful for my life, just pure love, heart energy, and just surrendered, fully in a state of surrender and allowance. And in that moment, something happened. Like I felt a pretty clear frequency shift in my system. And then out of nowhere, my hands and arms just start floating. They just start moving on their own. And I truly felt like I was not doing it. I felt like I was literally a puppet on a string. And it was freaky and amazing and like, whoa, like what's happening? And I was in a light trance. So I kind of like went into this half trance state where I didn't want to talk, because it was like trance, but I could if I wanted. I could also stop it if I wanted to, but I didn't want to because the feelings associated with it were just so powerful. And it was like the deepest peace and the deepest bliss I could experience. And I just felt all of this energy start to move through my system. And through my own past meditation, like I was in a Buddhist Sangha at one point, like I've had a meditation practice, and then also through early psychedelic experiences, I was already somewhat familiar with my energy body. But this was like a whole nother level of being aware of my energy body. And I felt and every time my arms did something or my hands did something, it was specifically, I know now what it was doing. It was directing the flow of prana in a very specific way through my system. And I remember as this was happening, it felt like my hands, what they were doing were literally drawing etheric source energy, like vital prana, like from the cosmos into my root chakra. And it just started to energize the kundalini. And then it was like, boom, like the kundalini was rising, and all these things were happening. And it was all like this stuff, these mudras that my hands were making were doing all of this. All that said, then, I stopped and I was like, okay, let's go back to the rave. This is at a rave, and then I felt just absolutely incredible, a little freaked out, a little bit like, wow, that was powerful. But just joined the dance floor, had a wonderful time. After that, though, I was like, okay, well, weird stuff happens when you're tripping. Like, kind of didn't think much of it, thought about it, but I was like, well, that was that. And then in the couple years that followed, every single time I would take any psychedelic, even a tiny microdose, it would start to happen automatically. And something had activated, and it was often at the rave. So I was like, oh God, here I am again at the rave, and I have to like remove myself from the dance floor. It's like go be in a corner awkwardly and like do this weird thing, and like being super afraid that people are going to think I'm so weird. And, but then, over time, I decided I was going to see if I could do it sober. And so I really grounded the practice, and I was in grad school at the time, and it was a very isolating time. So I just like really just meditated, developed it, tried for like 2 years. And I would try to recreate the experience. I would like, dance, and then I would meditate, or I would like take a run and I would meditate and see if I could do it. And I didn't want to force my hands. I just wanted to allow, is this going to happen or not? And I couldn't do it. And then finally one day, after lots of just steady training myself, I was running on the beach, and this was in Encinitas, California. And just sat on a rock to meditate, and boom, it just started happening. And finally I was like, wow, I can do it. And the really interesting thing too, which I didn't even realize at the time, but it was on Swami's beach, which is like, and I was literally like in front of the self-realization center that Yogananda,
Mm-hmm.
like it was like, what? You know, so that was interesting. And then years went by, and during COVID lockdown, that's when I really developed the practice and started to understand this was an energy work modality. I started to put all the pieces together. I was, you know, for example, like this is an example of something like when I was first deepening it. You know, one of the first big breakthroughs I had with it, I could feel a ball of energy, and the field has texture. Like I can actually feel textures in the field, and they're just different points of resistance. They're different knots and things. It's the way that energy concentrates and sticks in different parts of the field and the physical body based on trauma or based on repetitive patterns or habitual patterns of thought. You know, it creates concentrated densities in your field. And so I could start to tune in, and I developed this like extra sensory perception, and I was channeling. I was in a trance, and I would just kind of like be like channeling it, you know, with my hands. And like, for example, I found this ball. It felt like I was literally holding a ball of air. And it was in front of my solar plexus chakra, and just was with it, just working with it, you know, and not sure what to do. What do I do next, you know? And at a certain point, I started to identify that it was fear. It was the emotion of fear manifested in front of my solar plexus chakra in this weird ball. And then I started to feel the fear. The more I worked with it, I'm like, I'm feeling afraid, you know? And then it triggered, you know, a traumatic memory. Wow. And then the moment that I'm feeling all that, then my hands start to do things. And then like a mudra will form, and the mudras, no, they just dissipate the ball of energy. So it's almost like popping the balloon. And then when it moves it, and it kind of unsticks it, boom, like massive emotional release, just bawling. And so that is how the energy is. I'm just giving this as an example of like, this is how the body is holistic. It's like, okay. And I'd always had digestive issues there too. It's like, okay, well, it's energetic. It's related to fear and this emotional frequency related to this specific thing in my life. And then when I'm able to cry about it, it's like everything moves and everything rebalances. And it doesn't always take the form of crying though. Sometimes I shake.
Right.
And it's like this hand tremoring that happens. It's like a handshaking thing. Mm-hmm. And I know now this is another way of just releasing energy. When there's like a really specific knot, you know, it'll shake, and it's loosening. It just like loosens the energy. And all these different kinds of things happen with my hands, and it's fascinating. And now I do this on clients, you know. At a certain point, I started to learn I could do this on other people. So now I do it as part of my work, and it's something I offer in the psychedelic spaces too, because I find it to be so potent on psychedelics for myself and others. I mean, I can do it sober. I like to do it sober, but if I take anything, let alone a high dose, I mean, it's just incredible. And, you know, it's definitely a tool for healing. And my clients have experienced all kinds of really interesting things and have changed their lives. You know, like things shift in their lives because their emotional and vibrational frequency has shifted. So they're then attracting and drawing in new things. So it's pretty wild stuff. But all of this is to say, this happened because of rave culture. It was raving that led me into this. So, you know, and feeling so safe in those contexts, feeling safe and so vulnerable that I could actually be expanded enough to allow this type of thing to happen. I don't know that would have even happened on my own in my house alone, you know?
Right.
So yeah, I think that there's a lot of potential with, okay, raving is one thing. What do we do with these expanded states and these like healing experiences that we have on the dance floor? how do we integrate those then into our daily lives? But thanks for listening to that long-winded story.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing it. And you brought up a couple of really cool points there as far as like, how do we integrate it? I think also something that came up for me is like if we're open to the idea that what we think of as our life is really a much bigger continuity of energy and, experience, and stepping into anything can be a catalyst for change. But like when we're stepping into that rave environment, just like when we step into a ceremonial environment or, a therapeutic setting, we're entering that crucible for change, for like a lot to happen, whether that's the release that needs to happen to like unlock the next thing, or we're reconnecting with some sort of energy that was there before, or we're just like, getting exposed to a bigger part of the mystery. I often, it's come up a couple of times on the show. I often like to sort of relate back to this scene in the first Doctor Strange movie where he first goes to the monastery and like meets the Ancient One, and she's
I haven't seen it, and I should.
Well, he's like saying like, explain magic to me, and she says, you've been living your life looking through a keyhole and trying to expand that keyhole, and then basically like she opens the door. Right. So think about that analogy, right? Like,
yes.
And then if we think about the fact that as human beings, we base our reality on this tiny little sliver of the visible light spectrum, right? This tiny little sliver of energetic frequency that we can see, and we say, this is it. This is reality. Yeah. And yet it's a tiny little sliver of the whole. And even if you look at different animals, other animals are seeing and experiencing the world differently based on the frequencies that they are open to, right? And then one of the things that I've thought about psychedelics for a long time is that it widens that frequency spectrum that we have access to.
Absolutely.
Right. And so instead of like just this little sliver, all of a sudden we're like open to a much wider spectrum. And it seems like sometimes the limit to that is really endless. So instead of like looking through a keyhole, we're like we're breaking down the door, or like building a bigger hole in the door at least. And then all of a sudden, like, oh, these things that seem like woo-woo or seem impossible, or, that even the language that we might use around it is like, wow, the craziest thing happened, right? Yeah. Well, is it crazy, or were you just open to a bigger aperture, of experience?
Exactly.
And then
totally agree.
Yeah. Right. And then like also just the similarities in what you described in your own energy work. And it's beautiful that you've been able to like develop that to the point of working with other people. It also reminded me of somatic experiencing, because it's like, you might start with somatic experiencing. And I tell this to people all the time. I'm like, it might start as like, oh, I feel something in my stomach. Right. But as you develop that awareness, it can go to, I know the size of it. I can feel the edges of it. I feel texture to it. There's a color to it. There's a shape. There's tactile sensation. And then as that awareness grows and grows and grows, all of a sudden there's a memory or an emotion in myself. Oftentimes I can tell how old that sort of trauma or that energy is, like how long it's been there, because it has a completely different somatic experience to me.
Yes.
You know, like the stuff that happened when I was 4, when my parents divorced, is like different than what happened to me when I was 13 or 30. You know, like there's a totally different experience. And I couldn't tell you logically how I know that. I just know it, you know, and so that's one of the reasons why somatic experiencing to me is so magical. So it's like what you described, like that's how I can relate to it, right? Like
absolutely. You know? And I actually have been calling it, so for years I've been calling it pranavidya because one of my teachers led me to discover pranavidya, which is a specific Indian mode of energy work that's rooted in tantric traditional yoga. It's quite, what I'm doing is very similar to it. But at the same time, I've started to shift that language because, you know, I'm not of that lineage. And also, I mean, maybe like there's some past life stuff, I don't know, but, you know, but I really view it more, I've been calling it somatic channeling lately. And I view it as super similar to somatic experiencing. It's just that it's almost slightly different. You know, it's taking it to almost like more of the energetic level instead of just the somatic. Right. And it's really what I'm so interested in is the body's unconscious movement. You know, and it's about, I've been kind of realizing, gosh, it feels like an antidote / like the antithesis of the current paradigm that we are in, which is very yang, which is very, when we're talking about spiritual masculine and feminine energies, you know, just like masculine and feminine at their core, it's like the active and the passive, the active and the receptive. And our culture is very active. It's very masculine. You know, it still is ruled by men, and it is produce, capitalism, go, do. And it's also rooted in logic, in reason, in science, in, you know, the rational mind. All of that is great. That's one way to experience the world. But this like work is the opposite. It is full yin. It is full reception. It is full allowance. You have to bypass the rational conscious mind in order to allow the unconscious somatic movement to take place. So I think it's like such a beautiful tool just to balance out like what most of us like experience on a day-to-day basis, you know, working too hard, like all the things, you know. And so, yeah, I love that you said, you know, you can't really explain it but you know it. And it's about developing your own knowing. Right. And this is where feminine intuition comes in, you know, and like we're so conditioned to be like, no, that's not real. But no, everybody has a deep intuition. Yeah. And learning to trust that is important. And I think psychedelics too, like you said, it opens us up to the full spectrum of experience. And that's what I love about them, especially psilocybin, which is what I work with the most. You know, it's like the full range. It can be everything and anything, which is really powerful, I think.
Yeah, there's something in that direct experience that goes beyond the analytical, that goes beyond the thinking mind. And for me, that's the discernment, because I do live in that world so much. I know what it's like to be in my head and to have a mindfulness, you know, and meditation practice for so many years, that where I can watch that process. I can watch the gears like turning, and I can watch the meaning channel and the analysis channel like working. And then there's an experience, and it could be something like you described, right? Like these big, powerful, like, you know, sort of paradigm shifting moments in your life. Yeah. It could be, I don't know, for me, it's also like in the totally like mundane minutia sometimes of like watching a hummingbird, you know, or like seeing, you know, like seeing a hawk in the sky at the right moment, or like, you know, like I have a lot of things with birds, but like there's other things obviously, but it's like, it's where that analysis like just shuts off and you're just in this moment, like everything just kind of aligns and you're just there and you can just appreciate it. And you don't have to sit there and go, wait, what just happened? Did that just really happen? Like that might happen later on. You know, you might sit there and like journal about it or try to unpack it with a therapist or with a coach or whatever, and like delve into it more, but it happened. And you know that it happened, and there's no question in your mind whatsoever that like, well, am I crazy? Like, no, it really happened, you know? And then when, especially when that starts to occur with other people there, when it's not just your energy field, when there's like somebody else there that can almost like validate that, then it adds this other level of like magic to it, because it's like, oh yeah, no. Right. Not only did I see that, you saw it too. So
totally. And that has happened a lot to me lately. And it's so cool. And also I'll just mention, like, you're talking about presence, you know, you're talking about the now, just being in presence of the now, which is kind of the most natural human state, but our conditioning constantly takes us out of it.
Yeah, that childlike state.
A childlike state, and it's a non-dual state. You know, it's a state of, it's beyond masculine, feminine, black, white. It is just all that is, you know. I mean, those states are just so powerful and beautiful. And again, like getting out of the analytical mind is so important, but so hard. Right. You know, we all are so heavily conditioned to be in the analytical mind at all times, which is why meditation is so hard for people. But once you can really get past those like blocks and humps in meditation, you know, that's when you can really, really go deep and explore what's there in that full range outside of your mind. Yeah. And that is like that's my practice. You know, I do energy work and meditate almost every day. And like the deeper I go with it, I mean, it's just incredible. Like the first couple of years, it was a lot of clearing of my field. It was a lot of clearing the trauma. Like, oh my God, here we go again. I'm going to cry. I'm going to shake, you know? And now it's a lot of just like deep bliss, euphoria, like that I can get to naturally when I'm not in my analytical mind. And yeah, it's really cool.
How do you think that people can integrate these experiences, especially when they are sort of happening in that looser, you know, rave context, or like not ceremonial or therapeutic set container? How do we keep it from getting unintegrated or disintegrated?
This is a great question. So one thing I want to say is I think when people don't integrate, this is where addiction can happen, or psychological dependency. I mean, you even see it, you know, in other psychedelic spaces where you feel like you need to trip every month or week or, you know, whatever. But, you know, when we're not integrating, that's when we need to keep going back and back and back. But at the same time, people go back more, not just because of drugs, you know, people are going back because of the ritual itself and how powerful and transformative it is. But I think integration can be as simple as talking to your friends about what happened, journaling, you know, and also like for me, becoming a DJ was part of my integration with the scene. You know, how do you evolve within that space? And how do you put yourself into those mental spaces at home, you know, listening to music, discovering music, dancing, you know, all these things I think are integration tools. And for me, you know, it has been like, to me, becoming a DJ and then also creating dance floor epiphanies and really setting an intention to talk about the stories that people are having publicly. And then the energy work, which was, you know, part of my somatic rave experiences, that stuff, you know, doing all of that to me is a form of integration. So, and then also, yeah, like, I mean, just being reflecting, you know, being like, I can't tell you, you know, for example, I was in Detroit a couple months ago for Movement Festival and went to No Way Back, which is, you know, one of my favorite parties of all time. And I just felt so incredibly inspired after that. So I went home and I started making music, you know, and it's beyond just making music and feeling inspired. It's like, this is part of my life purpose, having epiphanies on psychedelics about how deeply I connect to this music, you know?
Right.
And so rather than just, okay, and I'm actually kind of trying to take a break from raving now, and DJing, so I can focus on that. So I can really go into production. So, and do more energy work, which are things that came out of the rave, you know?
Right.
So I think that, to me, that's how I integrate personally. But I think it can be as simple as like continuing to be with your community outside of the club, which can be a challenge for people sometimes, but let's all get together in the park and talk about our experiences at the rave, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And just bringing some awareness and consciousness to it, you know? And through reflection, like, whoa, what just happened there? You know, that's where the analytical mind can be great. You know, we had this moment of deep presence in our bodies, and now let's like think about that. What does that mean to us? So yeah, I think that's what I would say.
I'm glad that you brought up Detroit, because that's definitely been a place that has been very special to me as far as the, you know, sort of spiritual aspect of raving. And there was also like this really cool quote that you had put in your talk that I liked that says, "This is a psychedelic safe space, a harassment-free zone where you can let go from the form society forces you to hold and be totally free. The you beyond boundaries, beyond the limitations of others' perceptions. This is something for your mind, your body, and your soul. When you feel this freedom, when you touch what you may have thought was untouchable, you'll quickly realize that there's no way back. This is an eternal concept. We didn't invent this, and the people who may think they didn't either. This is our cultural heritage from a time before history. It's taken many forms, from dancing around the fire at a coming-of-age ceremony, imbibing soma, to losing it on the dance floor." And, you know, there's so much of that sort of encapsulates what we've been talking about, and even takes it deeper, you know, like the fact that the primary, you know, sort of music that's happening in the rave context is, you know, this 4/4, you know, constant beat, which is also what the shaman uses during a drum journey, that constant beat in union with that syncopation, you know, so there's those two things happening at once. You know, and just the fact that that's from Detroit is like a beautiful thing to me.
Yeah,
you know?
so totally. Yeah, so that quote is a description from that is how No Way Back, this party that's thrown by Interdimensional Transmissions, which is a collective and a label, and they throw this party every year. It's iconic. That's how they describe the party. That's the description from the resident advisor blurb. So yeah, they're such an amazing, talented crew that cares a lot, you know, and really is coming from this very intentional perspective. And yeah, I love the way they described that party. And it's part of No Way Back is actually part of a weekend long event in Detroit called Return to the Source. So it's separate from the festival. It's an after party.
Right.
But it's literally like starts on Friday, ends on Tuesday morning. It's just nonstop pretty much. So you can, I mean, yeah, honestly, most years I'd pretty much just stay there and just dip in and out. And it's amazing. It's like transformative. It's a portal. You go in and you come out as somebody else. So yeah. Detroit too, you know, of course, like I'll mention, for those who don't know, Detroit is the birthplace of techno music. So, you know, Detroit's extremely important in rave history. And it was, the music was born from Black musicians, a particular group of people known as the Bellevue Three. And like the roots of electronic music reside in Detroit and Chicago. So yeah, it's worth mentioning.
It was so cool for me to start going there, like just being mostly familiar with like the Southern California, like rave culture and rave scene, and going there and having the experience that techno is so part of like the mainstream culture of the city, because like a lot, even though there's this big culture in LA, like a lot of it is underground,
and the underground techno community in LA it's just amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the warehouse culture there is wild. Yeah.
but like the first time I went to Detroit, even before movement started, we went and saw Carl Craig play in this little tiny dive bar, and there were like literally people with like walkers and canes on the dance floor. Like, I'm like, what are these old people doing here? This is amazing. What, like this is, and like the fact that people bring their kids and their families to the festival, and just like, it was like, oh wow, this is so cool that it's just so integrated with the culture of the city.
Yes. That's funny you mentioned that. The very first time I went to Detroit, I went to Motor City Wine, divey little venue, and Carl Craig was playing on the back patio to like 12 people, and it was like half his family. It was just I was like, what is going on?
Right.
Like, it was just so special. So yeah, it's woven into the fabric. It's part of the history of the city, and I think that's kind of one of the cool things about Movement Weekend is it seems very embraced by the people of Detroit. They recognize it as a part of their cultural history. So and some really important things for me in terms of like integration and what I would call evolution have occurred during movement. Like it took me like a few years to figure it out, but like the beginning of my decision to like stop drinking alcohol like occurred in the middle of movement, and coming out of my divorce and like going to movement after sort of this hibernation period and grief, like completely opened me up to the relationship I'm in now and the path that I'm on now as like a coach and breathwork facilitator. And like so all of that happened without that ceremonial or therapeutic setting. So it does go to show, even though we're talking about our experiences in the eaches and the individual, this example of like what you really did a deep dive in your talk, and like the reason that I felt so inspired to like share that on this podcast, because it wasn't just me. And that was something that I noticed was like after your talk, there was this whole group of people that kind of mobbed you and were like, yes, like, thank you for saying this thing that I've been thinking or trying to express for years, and that nobody gets, that there is this ritual aspect. And, outside of like maybe the Grateful Dead, doesn't really exist in that same context in our current culture and climate. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I was so moved by the response and how many people it resonated with. And and it was wild to me. People would like clap at some of the things I would say. It was like, okay, I'm truly not alone here. There's other people who get this, and this needs to be talked about a bit more, I think. And And I'll just share it, like not to go so negative or anything, but I had heard from a friend that there was someone who was really not okay with the fact that I gave this talk. And, and I think this is part of why it moves people so much when someone puts a voice to these things, because it is still heavily stigmatized. Recreational use is seen as like not okay in the psychedelic community by some people. And yet I think it's really, we can't just dismiss this ritual. It's also a movement. I mean, rave culture, it's a global movement. Right. And also for people who maybe, have really particular views about how psychedelics should be used. And again, I went through a full training. Like I am like an intentional psychedelic guide, I understand those viewpoints very much. Right. But at the same time, it's also important to just say, like, this is the place that people get into psychedelics for the first time often. So many people who have never taken a psychedelic before, they do it at the rave. And that might lead them into a path of deepening their relationship with psychedelics. So it's an entry point. It's an entry point to a specific world, but also many worlds, because it's a cross section of movement and dance and music and psychedelics and healing. Right. And to go through that experience with other people is, such a beautiful thing, to be exposed to so much at once. And so I think, like, again, this is why I don't think people, yes, like, again, safety is very important. And, but I think it would be a shame to just dismiss recreational use altogether, because there's a lot to be discovered and explored within these spaces and what's actually happening. It's more than just a party. Right. I was already, intentionally using psychedelics before I found all of this. And as somebody who was coming from the Santo Daime community, that's like, when I found this raving, I was like, this is interesting and important, right. So it's not like for me, it wasn't the entry point to psychedelics, and I still found it to be extremely powerful and just as potent, if not more potent, than my experiences in the Santo Daime.
Yeah.
So because it's of my culture.
Right.
I don't speak Portuguese, and I was being forced to sing in Portuguese for 8 hours. Mm-hmm. It's like, so it's okay. Like, right. If that is what people connect with, of course, but it comes back to rave it's like a modern form of these lost rituals.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. I definitely there are people that feel that way, like that this isn't valid, or they might, be critical or judgmental. I will be the first one to say that, like, from where I sit, it's very easy for me to be judgmental and critical and to look at certain situations and say, wow, it looks like there's a lot of unintegrated like work here.
And there
is. And I think what you and I are saying is, through this conversation, is you don't have to necessarily agree with it, but there's more to be gained by being curious than judgmental. And mm-hmm. Be curious, be open-minded. Maybe it's not your thing. Maybe you're not going to be standing next to us on the dance floor at 3 a.m, like having the time of your life. But, right. Be curious rather than judgmental about it, and open to the fact that there are different paths. There are different ways into the sort of into the sacred, into the presence of the divine, and
into the self, into the body.
Right.
Even if someone's not overtly spiritual, not everyone in the rave community is. Yeah. Ways into the self. And even if it brings up darkness, right? Even if someone has a terrible experience at the rave, which does happen, right? Oh my gosh, like, all of the material, the shadow material that's uncovered through that may not have been exposed otherwise, is a place to start. And I think that, again, it's like to me, I see it as a sort of getting outside of the dualistic good and bad. It's all self. It's all important to think about. And sure, okay, maybe there's a lot of unintegrated material, but for some people, maybe going to Peru and doing ayahuasca with a shaman, or maybe hiring a psychedelic facilitator one-on-one is not the path for them.
Yeah.
And yet healing is what matters. And I had a friend recently say to me, like, because I've been struggling a lot with whether or not I want to continue DJing and how far do I want to go down that path? I don't know, when I really feel like deep down I'm a healer. And he was like, stop thinking of it as like one or the other. Like, your DJing is healing for people. Your energy work is healing for people. It's all healing, And I was like, gosh, you're so right. And another thing I'll mention in this line, just to follow my train of thought, is I actually was on another podcast that talked about the parallels between energy work and DJing. And there's so many. Right. And I view them as both. They're literally just both ways of modulating energy. Sound is frequency. And with DJing, you're using external tools to affect and modulate energy and frequency for others. And energy work, you're using internal tools to do that. So it's all healing work, yeah. And again, I really hope I'm not coming off as critical or judgmental, because I truly believe that all the psychedelic spaces are beautiful and important, and I love them all. I've explored so many, and so I just think, like you said, though, but approaching all of them from a place of curiosity. Yeah. And thinking about, okay, even in the worst case scenario, maybe there's something to be learned there. Maybe that was actually a good thing for somebody. And this comes back to staying open to the full range of experience that psychedelics allow for,
Yeah. Yeah. Having curiosity, having an open mind, and just saying, like, you know what, maybe I don't understand this, but can I have curiosity about it? And maybe it's not for me, and that's okay, but for some people, this is a good way, and you don't have to be like, I think, like, I'm not sure if I think we were talking about this before we started, but like, even without that context of spirituality, like when I started using psychedelics, it wasn't like, oh, I want to go and have this spiritual awakening, but the experiences that I was having more times than not were leading me in that direction. And, and so there's something that goes beyond the label and the analysis, that's that heart opening and that connection to spirit through the heart. And that is something that the rave environment does very well, partially because of MDMA, partially because of the community, and partially because of the people who came together to say, you know what, there's so much in life where I am feeling judged and, sort of isolated and not accepted. And I want to create this container as the antithesis of that. I want to create this place where I feel safe, where I feel accepted. And, you mentioned the music, and to me, some of the most powerful dance music that I still come back to and I still get chills listening to is the music that plays right into that. Like, yes, there are amazing songs that are open to interpretation because they have no words whatsoever, right?
Yes.
But then, there's the other side of it where it's like, no, let's just lean into that. If you think about, even within that thing that I read, something for your mind, your body, and your soul. I mean, I instantly think of a particular song when I hear that, or, I can think of Eddie Amador's house music. Like, not everyone
Mm-hmm.
understands house music. It's a spiritual
Mm-hmm.
thing, a body thing, a
Totally.
soul thing,
Exactly.
you
And
know?
that is and when you are experiencing that and in an altered state and you hear those words, oh my gosh, it's
Right.
just so powerful. I mean, that's also one great thing about house music. Well, electronic music in general that does incorporate vocals is like the vocals are very intentional a lot of the time, you know?
Right. Right.
And yeah, it's so great. And no, yeah, and I want to mention too, I talked about this a lot in my talk. Like, I talk a lot about the power of dance, but it's joyful.
Right.
It's joyful, and and again, talking about the full range of psychedelics, yeah, it can be painful, it can be hard, and it can also be really fun and really joyful. And I think we underestimate the power of joy as a healing tool. Healing doesn't always have to be it's all dark all the time. To experience a frequency of joy and lightness and happiness in your body in a state of celebration with others is deeply healing. It's deeply healing, especially for those who struggle with chronic depression, who don't know how to experience joy in their body. I think dance, again, it brings us back to the body in a particular way. Like for those who have had physical trauma, who have gender dysmorphia and things like that, it can really be a beautiful thing to feel, oh my gosh, I feel good in my body because I'm dancing and I'm happy. Like that's something that it's not something we get every day. So that's medicine too. and
Yeah.
and then yeah, I was going to probably mention something else, but
When I started studying Buddhism and particularly being exposed to this idea of bodhicitta, the universal compassion, that you would
mm-hmm.
treat everyone as with the same love and compassion that a mother would treat their children. Um, Immediately, the only frame of reference that I had for that was the feeling of being on MDMA at a rave, and like the fact that you could meet somebody and immediately feel as close to them as like your best friend, that there was
Mm-hmm.
absolutely no separation there. And
Yeah.
um this might be like a good way to kind of wrap this up, is this quote that I took from your talk. I hope it's okay because you took
Mm-hmm.
it from Eris Drew. This is
Mm-hmm.
beautiful quote. I found the oneness and ego loss I experienced at raves on MDMA extremely healing. The feeling is like a kind of universal empathy, which extends to people that you don't know, people different than you, and importantly, yourself. The impact when you're dancing is an openness to the emotional content of the music and a feeling of oneness with the people around you. That is the ideal of dance music, as imperfect and flawed as it is in actual execution because of power structures, inequality, racism, sexism, ableism, and transphobia. These structures exist even if it feels like they fade away in the mental state catalyzed by the drug. Accordingly, for someone who isn't grounded in radical politics, MDMA could look like a cure all for society's ills. As I've learned, the drug is no panacea, but MDMA does offer a glimpse of an improbable utopia whose lasting spiritual resonance can be motivational force for change, healing, and growth. The reason I think MDMA is so powerful in the context of rave culture is that it creates a sense of community on the dance floor. Ecstatic rituals in most cultures appear to center around communities. The ritual serves a myth making function for the group and solidifies community values. It is axiomatic that having intense experiences with others binds you to them. In many cultures, specific rituals signpost coming of age and maturity. And that was from Eris Drew from More Than a
Mm.
Party.
So good.
Yeah.
She's amazing. She's amazing. Yeah. For listeners who don't know, she's a DJ, and she's just a powerful writer, incredible DJ. Anyway, yeah. Thank you for reading that.
Yeah. And thank you for, I mean, like a lot of this was, you know, kind of focused for me by your talk. So thank you so much for, you know, having the courage to share that. And, you know, I feel, okay, maybe maybe not everybody in the room like was as supportive, but it certainly resonated with me. And like I was mentioning, there was like this whole group of people that wanted to share and connect with you after the talk. And so it was very evidence to me that you were saying something that a lot of other people felt and maybe never had the opportunity to share or to crystallize it in that way. And I think it's an important, you know, thing to mention, especially as psychedelics come out more into the mainstream. You know, like we've talked during this conversation about these super underground parties, right? And at the same time now there's like these giant festivals and things that are very mainstream, at least comparatively to like where we started or some of the events that we've been to, you know, like, you know, dancing in the woods or in the desert, you know, with generators and like the dark, you know, for hours. Right. Exactly. So, but as psychedelics, as a sort of monolith, and I don't think that psychedelics are a monolith, but if you wanted to put it in that context, as it continues to grow and come out into the mainstream zeitgeist more, there are these divergent paths and these different ways to the center. And personally, I think that the rave is as valid in that conversation as any other set and setting. And I appreciate that you did such an amazing job of like really bringing that in a lot of its complexity, you know, bringing the set and setting into it, bringing the harm reduction into it, bringing the just being honest and saying there are dark parts to this, there are unintegrated and like dependency things. And just like you said, that doesn't stop anybody from going to an ayahuasca ceremony or, you know, any of these other contexts where, let's face it, those things are happening as well. So, you know, I appreciate you bringing that into the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for, just asking me to come on. And I'm glad that it resonated with you. And and I think it is an important thing to at least put into the larger conversation. And like you said, I mean, it's interesting how many people since then have reached out to say, just thank you for validating my experience, where I've generally felt like invalidated.
Right.
And so I think, we shouldn't be invalidating anyone's experience. You know, we should be open to the variety of experience that can occur in combination with psychedelics. And like you said, it's a path towards the center. And, you know, as a deeply spiritual person, like what I'm connecting with most besides other people is myself at the rave, is that sacred center point, you know, of it's like the eye, it's the Shushumna channel. It's, you know, it's the divine. And like, that is I think that can be accessed in many settings. So including the rave. And one last little thing just I want to throw out there is like just something to think about, because I've been thinking about it lately. Since I live in Colorado, I think it's interesting. Colorado is one of the epicenters of electronic music in the US. I mean, massive electronic music culture here. And it's also an epicenter of psychedelics. And I think that that's not a coincidence. I think that there's synchronicity around that. So just something to consider. The two go very hand in hand.
Well, Taylor,
thank you.
Yeah, Taylor, thank you so much. Where can people get a hold of you should they want to learn more or work with you? I know you
definitely
have a lot of different, you know, projects and things that you're working with. So
yeah, thanks. Yeah, my website is the best place, just taylorbratches.com. It has everything I do on there, including my DJ life. And then if people want to find my music, They can go to SoundCloud. It's just look me up, Taylor Bratches, on the SoundCloud page. That's where all of my DJ mixes are. Or my Instagram, which is just at Taylor Bratches. And I also have another Instagram account called the Somatic Channeling Institute, where I focus on the energy work stuff that I was talking about. So, yeah.
Awesome. We'll definitely put some links on the show page for that. And I hope that for you listening or watching this, that at the very least, this came across with some curiosity. Maybe you ask some questions or think about things in a different context. And like, I think the vital point of this conversation to me is having that curiosity rather than that judgment, like we were talking about, and there is a wide world out there, and just because you haven't experienced a particular thing doesn't make it any less valid or real for the people that are experiencing it. And that's okay. So just stay curious, keep practicing, and we'll see you next time on The Vital Point.